everyone. This is Tom Linfield. I'm the Vice President of Community Impact here at the Madison Community Foundation. Thank you all for joining us today. You have some exciting speakers. I know these folks well, and hopefully you'll get some rich content out of our discussion today. I'm always happy to chat with nonprofits offline. So if there's anything that intrigues you today, we will have some time for Q&A, but by all means, please do follow up. All of my contact information is on the website, both at Commons and at the Madison Community Foundation. So I want to talk to you today about fundraising during this COVID era. And let me start by saying that many of the things I will say are things I've been saying for years. So regardless of what's going on during COVID, during this crazy upside down world we're living in, I think it has exacerbated some of the ways that we can fundraise and tell our stories. And what I'm going to try to do is boil down to its essence, I think, three main points. One is, how can you be essential? How can you be creative? And how can you build your capacity? So I think first and foremost, and this is always true for any nonprofit, how are you essential? I really think that's the key, not to only operating a fine nonprofit, but to finding funding for it. How do you engage with your donors, whether they're individuals, corporate, foundation, by telling them what essential services to the community. And now it is never more important time than to do that. So what do I mean by that? It means, how can they live with you or can they live without you? That is truly what is happening, I think, right now. So for many of you, your story has changed. And you're actually more essential than ever. So I'll give you an example. The Literacy Network, they work with hundreds of people, tutoring them in English, work with many volunteers. They found that about 70 to 80% of those that they tutor have lost their jobs. So they've pivoted to providing gas cards, to providing grocery cards, to providing online technology, laptops and things, and referral services for employment, other things. In other words, they're going deeper. They're not just looking at what they traditionally do. They're saying, we are there to impact the individual. We are helping these people learn English as a tool to really becoming a rich part of the community, and we will do whatever it takes to do that. The Omega School is another example. This is an organization, their sole purpose is to help people get their GEDs. The local GED testing center is closed. That doesn't stop them. They looked around the state, they found one in Appleton. They are giving gas cards to their students so the students can drive up to Appleton to take the tests. They've had, I think, 6 kids graduate in the last 2 months. They've had 43 exams taken. They continue to operate because they know that their work is essential and they're getting that across to donors. What is the story that you tell? What is your impact on the community? And that's not always what you want to do, but what you want to change. And even though we're all sheltered home and stuck and wearing masks and not able to necessarily gather, this has been a huge opportunity for many agencies to go online. I talked to one agency who said, you know, our long-term strategic plan was actually for online classes. This has forced us to do so. Mm-hmm. So I think talking about what you do is essential. Part of that is also saying, that this is part of our strategic plan. We will not let the obstacles get in our way. They're not obstacles, they're hurdles, but not obstacles. It's a key component. You should continue doing that. Now is a time more than ever to be telling your stories and how they might have changed under COVID. Be careful though, the story is not need. The story is opportunity. It will not help to call and engage with donors as it never does, and say, woe is me, this isn't working, that's not working, this is not working. Things are difficult times. But the inspiring agencies are the ones saying, we've been faced with this challenge, here are the 3 ways that we're dealing with it. And if you can help us, we will and be stronger or richer or keep doing what we're doing and doing it in different ways. The school district recently realized that 2,000 of their students didn't have any kind of internet access. Community Foundation was involved in helping them fund that. So now every student in the school system has Wi-Fi, a hotspot at home, 6 months of internet access. So for those 2,000 families that weren't connected. Now many other agencies are trying to capitalize on that and say, okay, We were doing art classes face to face. Now we're going to do them in terms of distance. We were doing things on location. Now we're engaging our volunteers to go drop off materials at people's homes. I'm a parent with 2 teenagers. My daughter is nannying 2 young children right now. I know more than ever, parents are in agony trying to find activities for their kids. Parents are looking for academics, for enjoyment, for riches. Is your opportunity. If you're an agency that traditionally did this in a live setting, then this is your opportunity to be hand delivering things, to get art supplies into the hands of kids, to get music. You can do some online to foster that. And I think a lot of foundations are pivoting in the way they fund. So traditionally, you use a tool to do something, right? I think we want to buy 10 laptops. The trick is to say we want to provide in-home education. Therefore, this tool will make that possible. And how can you be in people's homes? Let me add social media. I think for many, this is maybe somewhat generational. I think most nonprofits have a social media presence now. But it's always been a little bit of a frosting. I think that many people approach social media as, if we have the time, we'll get an intern or we'll add that on. This is your prime right now. Is social media is connecting because you cannot connect live. I'm also a huge believer in snail mail. I have been writing letters to people on a daily basis since this shut down. I strongly advise that you engage with people. Again, are you essential in terms of the relationship building that you're doing? Is there a way for you, for your staff, your board, your volunteers to be engaging, reaching out to donors, telling your story, not necessarily asking for money, but telling your story, telling them what wonderful things you're doing, what things you're capable of. We are all good news. We are all looking to be part of something that does good in what is a very challenging community right now. Let me switch to Street Art Center. They do a lot of music lessons, art lessons on location. They are in the middle of a capital campaign. This is a very challenging time to be in the middle of a capital campaign. They quickly pivoted to online learning and knew that they needed to get supplies into the households of kids. So they decided on a weekly basis, every week they would send a different set of art materials. They began with 40 families. By the time they were through, they did 10 weeks of this. Every week, a different set of supplies, 100 families, and then they were paying their teaching artists to work with those families with some online. So it could be Lego, it could be sticks and wire, it could be painting, it could be mud, yarn. But again, the creativity, the hands-on, getting the kids engaged. Some were young, some not so young. Getting the materials out. The Madison Reading Project, they've been delivering, I think they've delivered over 20,000 books already this year. They did not let this stop them. And they started delivering, when it applies to, they started donating both art books, art supplies, and they're working with many, many agencies. So if you're working with young children, partner with them. This is a great opportunity to capitalize on the strengths of other agencies. And I think that funders really appreciate that kind of collaboration and that kind of partnership. If you're conducting a capital campaign, visuals are your best friend. Do a walkthrough. Some of us, like me, are building geeks. I like to see the studs. I like to see the sheetrock. I like to see, I used to do this myself. I like to see the painters at work. Troy did a great little impromptu tour, nothing fancy, just an iPhone and somebody walking through talking about it. Take your donors on that journey with you. People might not know that construction is an essential business, so they may not be paying attention that you're not stuck and locked down, that you're actually moving forward. This is a great time. If you haven't begun your capital campaign yet, go out to a field, put some sticks in the ground, put some tape up, make it up, do a virtual, use some spray chalk and say, here I am standing in the new kitchen for what will be our new community center, or this is the reading room for our new library. Oregon, the public library is building a new library. There are many ways to engage people. We worked with a group a few years ago who were building a park, and they had children draw what they wanted that park to be, and then they put those images up on restaurants in town. You could do that today visually. Engage people. If you're an environmental agency, do it Set up a camera next to an animal nest. Show us things that we would not ordinarily see, because that tells us the importance. Especially if you're an arts agency, I think, an environmental agency, we are aching to get out of our homes. We want to be going somewhere. So if you can help us, you can say, if you come here on a weekly basis, this is the evolution that you might see. Engage your audience, use art, gather images, ask people, we're going to have a monster drawing contest and we're going to post 100 of the best monsters on our website. Get your kids involved. This is a way to get families engaged and connect interactivity. So that kind of creativity. Then I want to talk about building your capacity. And I know that most agencies are just working as hard as they are low staffed right now. But there is something about not having to commute, being stuck in our homes, that also allows us, I think, a little bit of time to shut the computer down, to not answer any emails for a few hours, and do some better strategic planning. And I always think that the double helix of a strategic plan is the strategic development plan and the strategic marketing plan. And I would really encourage you during this time yourselves, assess your own development. Where is your money coming from? There's an exercise I love to do where you draw a pie chart and you divide that into where does our money come from? Corporate, foundation, individual, events. Then a second pie chart where you say, where are we spending our time fundraising? And then the third pie chart is where would we like to be? Now is the time for you and your staff, and especially your board, to understand this is where we are and this is where we'd like to be. And it really is drawing and holding yourself accountable to doing specific things. So I'm a practical person. If I had to take 3 steps moving forward, one, doing that exercise and then saying, how many foundation gifts do we want? How many asks do we want to make? I'll channel consultant Amanda White for a moment, who recently said, call 2 to 3 donors a week. Just call them on the phone, tell them an exciting story about what you're doing. I talked with the Aldo Leopold Nature Center recently, and they told me their trails are open, and they've put a children's book laminated on the trail, and there's 1 page every 20 feet. So a family can go, they can read to their child or have their child read to them, then they walk another 20 feet and another 20 feet, and they read a story as they go on. That's creative, that's essential, that's engaging, right? So these are the kinds of things that you can do and you could tell a donor about if you talk to them. And you're not calling again for money, you're calling to engage them. They are part of your journey and your success. I would say, talk about your impact, not the tools. So we've had several organizations contact us and say, we need money for PPE, for the personal protection equipment. And do you know anybody who funds that? So the quick answer is no. Nobody has that as their mission. I mean, the longer answer is some might be doing that, but I think the trick is to say, we're getting books into the hands of 20,000 children. We need some protective equipment to help us do that even better. It's just a tool. You don't go out and saying, I need toner for my Xerox machine, right? You talk about the impact your agency is having. This is the exact same. That's this year's tool. 2020, the tool you need is the PPE. But talk about the impact. Talk about what you traditionally do and are wonderful at. I would say sharing your success stories, particularly how you've been able to pivot. I think that's your most important story right now, is not to say, woe is us, I'm wringing my hands, I've let staff go, our doors are closed, nothing is happening. You can say that internally. You can call me, I'm a good confessional for that sort of thing. But really what you want to do is call and say, we just had 30 kids get their GED math exam done. And by hell or by high water, we got them. We helped them. We paid for online classes. We got them to the tests. We took care of their kids so they could take the tests. We helped them get another job because they lost their job. How is your agency part of the solution, part of enriching Madison? These are difficult times. I truly believe that nonprofits are the leaders. the voices I'm hearing, the people who are saying we are going to make this better, we are going to make this a wonderful community that thrives, have all been nonprofit leaders. So the work you're doing is critical. I believe that this storm will eventually pass. We are here to help you in any way we can. I'm always happy to brainstorm with people, and I hope that this is helpful, and I thank you all. Good luck.
We are going to do a little bit of an interview format with Michael Johnson, and I'm going to let him talk a little bit about his background and profile. But we at the Center for Community and Nonprofit Studies have had the chance to observe the work he's been doing in these very uncertain and challenging times. So we're excited to pick his brain a little bit for the benefit of all of our audience members. So Michael, you've presented over the years at our conference, and you've talked a lot about relationship building and strategies for fundraising generally. You've obviously had a ton of success as a really established fundraiser in our community. Just wondering if you can comment a little bit on some of the tips from your career that are playing out specifically in these challenging times, but maybe in general, just to start us off.
Yeah, so I would just say, Mary Beth, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate you all putting together this conference. And so I would say there's a couple of things that I think we all as nonprofit professionals need to focus on. One, just building a strong team around you, a strong team of volunteers. You know, we cannot do this work by ourselves, and being able to build that team around you, even if you're a very, very small organization or a large nonprofit organization. The stronger your volunteer base is, the more successful fundraiser you will become. Two, one of the things that we have implemented at the Boys and Girls Clubs, and I've talked about it for years, the importance of having a board report card and being able to, just like every year when your board evaluate you, your board should be evaluating its members as well, and they should be setting annual goals in terms of what their attendance goals are, how much money they should be raising, you know, as a body. They should also be doing board gap analysis to determine if you have the right makeup of people. I think that's very, very important. I would also say being able not being afraid to tell your story. You know, sometimes people are uncomfortable doing that, and I think you have to shout out at the top of your lungs when you're doing good work for the people that you're responsible for empowering and serving, and not being afraid to speak up on the issues that might impact them. So a lot of times we'll write op-ed pieces, we'll write open letters, just to stay in front on specific issues, and also to advocate for issues that will benefit kids as it relates to the work that we do. And then the last one I would say that's very, very critical in this space is training. I remember my first job as a fundraiser was when I got hired as a vice president at the YMCA, and my annual fundraising goal was $200,000, and I was so afraid, you know, of that goal. So I went to the University of Indiana, went to their the Center of Philanthropy to become a certified fundraising executive, and it took 6 months to get that certification. So I would say take advantage of any credentials that you can get, and the credentials are just one piece. The other piece is, you know, doing the practical work. So if you focus on building strong board, strong relationships, telling your story, and then make sure that you and your folks are trained, I think you'll become a very, very successful fundraiser.
Okay, well, that is an excellent baseline for us to start with here today. I think that now, you know, what we're all thinking about at this moment is just the amazing, you know, deluge of acute uncertainties and challenges that we're facing in these times. The social safety net gaps that we're seeing in COVID-19 and the reveal of the systemic racism that has been there for a long time, but now is appropriately front and center. You know, this really does change the context for fundraising for a lot of organizations. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the work that you've done during this time and how some of your general tips might translate or need to be modified for organizations that are dealing with this moment.
Yeah, so I would tell you, as an African American nonprofit leader, and you see some of the disparities in fundraisers between our white counterparts, and you see studies that show the kinds of stipulations that are put on, African Americans or people of color who are in leadership roles. It's a lot more stringent than those who are ran by white-led organizations. And I think that's a challenge within itself. I would tell you during this pandemic, I personally struggled initially, whether or not I needed to focus my leadership on just raising money for our Boys and Girls Club kids. But I also know that when you have, whether it's a pandemic or issues like this, that you have to think about the broader issues. So I would say a couple of nights I lost sleep, and my heart was telling me that we had to raise money for the broader issues of the community. But we also had to make sure that we brought along our donors, our board members, and our staff to internally talk about what the challenges were. And so we decided that we were going to launch a campaign to make sure that every kid in our region had access to food, because we were beginning to shut down all the restaurants, community centers were closing, but we also saw that people were losing their jobs. So we launched a campaign, and we thought we would raise $50,000, and we ended up working with United Way and Selfless Ambition, and we raised over 2.1 million. Secondly, we immediately began to partner with groups like Feed Kitchen and launch food trucks all over the city to make sure that young people and their families had a place to eat. We also paid the bills of over 7,900 people and fed thousands of folks. And then we raised enough money to fund 39 different organizations. That is not within the typical work that you do at a Boys and Girls Club. And I don't think there's one other Boys and Girls Club in the nation that has done anything close to what we have done here in Madison in terms of funding, other organizations. We also raised about $250,000 after all the looting took place in downtown to help, support those businesses. And so the question came up and said, Michael, some of our stakeholders are like, you're raising a lot of money for different groups. Is this hurting Boys and Girls Clubs at the same time? And it absolutely did not. I think people recognized all the good that we were doing. And in fact, within the last 30 days, 5,900 donors, individual donors, contributed over $1 million directly to Boys and Girls Clubs. And I had a supervisor once tell me, if you do good things and if you're strategic and you bless others, the blessings will come your way. And so while we were able to help 39 other organizations and help thousands of young people and their families eat plus pay their bills, our donors and people who had never ever given to Boys and Girls Club stepped up in a very, very, major way, because I believe they saw the work that we were doing.
Absolutely. And in a minute, we'll talk a little bit about how organizations that don't have the kind of reach and identity that the Boys and Girls Club currently does in our community might still be able to take some of these ideas forward. But first, this is a little bit of an unplanned question, but it's a follow-up on the COVID-19 and racial justice moment that we're in right now. I'm wondering about two kind of specific components about this moment. One is, what about the social distancing requirements and the way that that may or may not have affected the way that you go about your fundraising? Or maybe the way that some of your, very skillful social media use made you well positioned, unlike others that didn't have that in place in a moment where you can't be out there meeting face to face with people. And then I'm also just wondering about this thing that I've been observing in the nonprofit sector, which is there's a lot of organizations that are doing work that in a, theory of change way may address racial inequities, but they probably weren't really making that nexus as clear in their organization, or doing it as specifically as they should, or telling the story as specifically as they should. And now I think they're thinking about that a lot, because they're asking the question, is doing after school programming for kids addressing racial justice in some way? And how is it, and how can we talk about it? Or are our arts efforts or our environmental efforts addressing racial justice? And I just wonder if you can talk about the social distancing piece, and then how maybe there's a possibility of looking at missions of organizations with a little bit more of a fine-tuned lens when it comes to all of our obligation to address racial justice.
That was a long question, so
I
let me
know. Sorry.
let me try to respond as best as I can. So I'll take the first piece about social justice and agencies aligning around at work. And so I would tell you, when you speak up on these kinds of issues, it's very, very messy and it's challenging. And when you're in a leadership role, if you really want to tackle these kind of issues, you have to be prepared to be uncomfortable. And if you're not prepared to be uncomfortable, allow somebody else to lead in that space, because you will run into opposition. I would tell you, I have lost donors who, for whatever reason or not, will put that carrot over your head and say, "Hey, I didn't like the position you took. Therefore, I'm going to pull my resources." And I'll tell you, I don't want donors like that at Boys and Girls Clubs. If you're going to make a contribution, make it on behalf of our kids. And if you want to have a discussion around an issue that we might be raising, let's have a healthy discussion without you trying to influence, how we think. And so, but at the same time, we respect when people give us feedback, but you should never make a contribution and threaten to take it back because we took a position on a certain issue. So be prepared that when you tackle these kinds of issues, that you will get pushback, but you'll also get praise from people, as well. So I would say, when I started at Boys and Girls Clubs, we had about 1,800 donors. We now have about 20,000. So we get a lot of donations from individual donors. And if you look at philanthropic giving in the United States, 4 out of 5 philanthropic dollars come from individuals, not from corporations, not from bequests, individual contributions. So we have to spend more time asking individual donors to invest in our work. And then finally, I would say, in terms of, aligning people towards social justice issues, at Boys and Girls Clubs, one of our social justice issues is making sure that low-income kids and kids of color graduate from high school. That is the number one. We have the number one racial achievement gap in the United States. So we have decided that we're going to raise $2 million every single year, that we're going to pay for tutors to be inside of classrooms, that we're going to have staff in all the schools to make sure that Black and brown kids graduate from high school. And that's one of our pillars to ensure that kids are either prepared for college and/or careers. And we raise money around that, and we set goals with the district to ensure that Black and brown kids are graduating from high school.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what I was kind of getting at. Is 20 years ago, maybe the Boys and Girls Club was doing after-school programming that would support kids in their school preparedness. But I think now is really a time where we can look at some of those programs as contributing to this overall multifaceted agenda of really addressing inequities. And you've been talking about your work like that for a long time, but I'm not sure that everybody that is doing related work is. But again, it's good advice to remind people that if they're going to talk about those social justice issues, they've got to be prepared for the realities of the spectrum of responses that they're going to get to.
And people, let me tell you, I've been here 10 years. I've had people call for me to be terminated, including people from the community, from donors. And while I get my fair share of praise from all over the county, there are people who get really, really upset when you speak on social justice issues, or when you speak on Black and brown issues, and people will try to undermine you when you do this kind of work. And if you're fearless and if you're prepared to tackle it, find out who can support you, drive it, and don't be afraid. But also, you have to educate yourself on these issues, because if you say the wrong things, do the wrong things, you'll become a casualty in the process.
And even if you've lost some people along the way, it seems to me that you bridging that work that you're doing with kids every single day to the social justice issues is exactly why you've had the success that you've had recently with all the fundraising.
Well, I would tell you, when I started at Boys and Girls Clubs, we had a hard time making payroll. We had 18 employees. Now we have close to 200. Our budget has grown over $500,000 every single year. And a lot of it comes from individual contributions. We try not, while I love larger contributions, You can only you can only innovate, in my opinion, if you have less restricted funding. And you got to be very, very skilled. And even for the smaller organizations, Mary Beth, I would tell you, it can be done if you focus on the work, focus on grinding, building a strong volunteer team around you. You would be surprised the number of people who will come through, but you got to give them direction. You got to focus your agenda, and I think the resources will come.
So just to revisit a previous question, and now that we're talking about the importance of relationships, did you have to tweak your approach at all with the social distancing, requirements that have kind of set in? I mean, that you're very big on social media. You talk about that at our conference. We know you're very talented in that way, but I got to imagine that you're missing that face-to-face thing too.
Man, I miss it so much. I
Yeah.
am an extrovert. I love being in large rooms with people. I love being around people. I love being in backyards and banquets. And it's been a struggle. And I'll just be honest with you. But I also realize I am a large African American male. And while I'm healthy, I know that this coronavirus can easily take me out, like it has done with other people. I struggled. I've been in pretty much probably every march that has happened in this city. And I remember with the current protest that's taking place, I wanted to be out there so bad. And I remember my wife telling me, Mike, your responsibility to Boys and Girls Clubs, your responsibility as a father, your responsibility to me as my husband, please don't put your life at risk. You can advocate without being there on the front lines. And I remember my wife having a conversation with me, and I decided not to participate in that way. And while I've tried to, be supportive of those efforts, I made a conscious decision to put my family first and not to expose myself. Now, there's some people that probably disagree or have voiced their concerns about my decision, around that. But I would say during this pandemic, we've done a lot. We've raised over $3 million to help low-income families. We've raised $100,000 to help restaurants stay open. We raised $250,000 to help downtown businesses stay open. There's been several incidents with Black women related to domestic violence types of situations. We've raised money to be able to, support them. So we're going to use our voice and our platform to be able to do great things. We're in the process of talking to the governor's office to place a statue at the Capitol of a significant African American woman by the name of Vale Phillips. It's a shame right now that there's no representation of not one African American person at the state capitol. And those are the kinds of discussions that we're leading and that we're interested in helping to raise resources for. And we're going to also continue to support young people. We put 150 young people to work, and we raised the money to be able to do that during this pandemic. And so there are a lot of people with a lot of wealth and generosity in this community. And I don't think you need a brand like Boys and Girls Club to be able to do that. I look at the work of a lot of grassroots organizations that started from scratch. You look at Sabrina Madison, you look at, Urban Triage, you look at the work that Lisa Payton Care, is doing. You look at the Focus Interruption Coalition. All of those organizations started with somebody who had a concept. Look at Madison 365. I remember when Henry Sanders brought that concept to me on paper. And within 2 years, Madison 365 is the largest African American news outlet in the country right now in terms of their activity on social media. And so it can happen if you got the will and you're willing to put in the time and you're focused around your work.
Any final parting thoughts for organizations out there across the country, actually, because this will be a national audience that are facing these times and maybe aren't as established as your org?
Yeah, so I would just say, stay encouraged, stay focused. And while these are very, very challenging times, there are a lot of good people that want to help and want to support, and you got to figure out how to inspire people to contribute, to your work. And I'm just a big fan that the page will always turn. And I'm also somebody who try to be optimistic. And I believe that while we will have tough days ahead, our country will turn the page on this issue. And we need good people who can fundraise and do things to support those who need us the most. There are thousands and thousands of people that's going to be impacted by this pandemic, and all of us are needed. Black people, white people, we're all needed. Latino people. Our leadership is needed to make sure that we can support the folks who need us the most. And a lot of times it's the people who live in challenged communities, who have been marginalized for years, and our collective thinking and intellectual capital and our support is needed more now than ever.
Hello, my name is Courtney Polster. I'm a Regional Development Manager with a Grace Hospice Care here in Madison, Wisconsin. And it's my absolute pleasure to be here with you all today to talk about the importance of stewardship in our line of work during difficult times. So it's no surprise that 2020 has been a year, right? I mean, there's no shortage of memes out there that really resonate with us on a given day. No matter what emotions that are brought out in a given day, we can certainly find something through social media that rings true to us. As I was scrolling through social media one night, as I was waiting for my kiddos to fall asleep, I came across something that gave me pause. And some of you may have seen this. The quote goes like this: "What if 2020 isn't canceled? What if 2020 is the year we've been waiting for? A year so uncomfortable, so painful, so scary, so raw, that it finally forces us to grow. A year that screams so loud, finally awakening us from our ignorant slumber. A year we finally accept the need for change, declare change, work for change, become the change. A year we finally band together instead of pushing each other further apart. 2020 isn't canceled, but rather the most important year of them all." Now, the optimist in me wants to believe this. The philosopher in me loves this stuff. Back in 2004, I was applying for doctorate programs in philosophy. And in my personal essay, I simply declared human nature to be good. I didn't present an argument in my personal essay for a doctorate program in philosophy. How naive, right? Now, someone challenged me on this in kind of an amused way that you would challenge the dreams of a child, right? But nevertheless, I spent the next 4 years completing my degree in St. Louis, and I explored theories that involved the intersection of human nature and psychology and philosophy and neuroscience, trying to prove otherwise. At the age of 26, degree in hand, I left academia. I did this because I didn't feel I had enough real-world experience to be at the helm of a classroom. 12 years later, with 12 years of experience in our nonprofit sector here in Madison, I still believe what I once stated so naively. There is so much good out there in the world. And how wonderful that we get to bear witness and help perpetuate it through our professional undertakings. I have witnessed so much good at my time at a Grace. I have seen a patient marry the love of his life days before his death. I've witnessed a donor understand that the reality and the need is far beyond what she had previously thought, and work to change that through the power of her gift. I've had conversations with a dying man who wanted to establish a legacy, only to have those conversations fall short before the time of his death. So yes, there is so much good out there in the world. 12 years into my career, I felt like I had finally hit my stride. I had great donor relationships. I was meeting my metrics. 2020 seemed like such a fabulous year. It was off to a good, strong financial start. My family and I packed up. We left the cold of Wisconsin to take a trip to Disney. We were in Disney when the world changed. Disney, of all places. Quickly, we were thrust from a wonderful vacation into the world of social distancing, mask wearing, and hand sanitizing, just like everyone else. We did our best to hide our heads in the Florida sand for a couple weeks before this became our reality. But nevertheless, we couldn't escape it. Upon returning, my first order of business was a donor meeting. And this donor meeting had quickly been changed from an in-person meeting to a phone conference while I was gone. And this meeting was with a new colleague who I hadn't partnered with much before, and a relatively new relationship with a community organization. So there were 3 representatives, my new colleague and myself, on the call. I went into this meeting just like I had any other donor meeting. I thought, I've got this, I'm prepared. However, at the conclusion of this meeting, it became pretty clear I had left my mojo in Marco Island. All those elements that we honed to perfection as fundraisers were missing from this conversation. There were no nonverbals to read. There was no handshake. There was no friendly hug. And the pace of the conversation was tragic. At the end of this conversation, it became very clear I had a job to do. I needed to adapt my approach to this new reality because there was absolutely no way that I was ever having that conversation again. 2 choices, evolve or repeat. I wasn't repeating. So after that conversation, I began to stew on the topics of vulnerability and relationships. I turned heavily to the work of Brené Brown, and I was inspired by some quotes that I found. One being, vulnerability is the birthplace of innovation, creativity, and change. This rang true to me. I needed a little bit of optimism. She also said that through my research, I found that vulnerability is the glue that holds relationships together. It's the magic sauce. Right around this same time, my eldest, Natalie, was beginning to enter the world of virtual first grade. And as she sat down at the family computer in our playroom/new office, and she was feeling a little uncertain, a little vulnerable, about to start her first big group Zoom call, she reached for my hand. I didn't know why I snapped a picture of it at the time, but I'm sure glad I did, because it was at that moment for me that it clicked how incredibly important connection with one another is during this time. Brown defines connection as the energy that exists between people when they feel seen, heard, and valued, when they give and receive without judgment, and when they derive sustenance and strength from the relationship. As fundraisers, this is our jam. This is our sweet spot. This is where we are comfortable. All the skills we naturally bring to our work, this is where we soar. So it got me thinking, if connection is so important, what are the tools that I'm typically using as a fundraiser to get there? And it dawned on me that it's not necessarily about finding brand new tools. We aren't doing anything brand new as fundraisers during this time, but we do need to recalibrate. We don't have to reinvent the wheel, we just have to realign it. Take a look at the tools we're using, like phone calls. How are we creating insider experiences? What's the role of video? Are we still sending mail? And what about visits? So I'll be honest, before COVID hit, phone calls to me were simply utilitarian. I used phone calls to simply secure face-to-face appointments. That was the sole purpose. Short, sweet, get something on my calendar, move on to the next item on my checklist. Phone calls now have taken on a deeper meaning. Instead of relying on the nonverbals or a friendly handshake, I'm now reliant on the pauses during a conversation, the tone in someone's voice. Those become my cues to pick up on this very same elements that I've always needed to do my job well. How well am I connecting with my donor? We can still create insider experiences, even working remotely. We can use videos as a tool for virtual tours. We can connect with someone via Zoom or Microsoft Teams to put a human element to some of our communications. Personalized mail, still possible. You can still send a birthday card or a note in the mail to a donor. And one more word about phone calls. During this time, I've been a lot less likely to receive a voicemail than a real person on the other end of that phone. What a fantastic opportunity we have to simply recalibrate some of our tools. Porch visits, outdoor social distancing visits are certainly options as well. But one thing that remains is we want to take our cues from our donors in terms of what tool, what method of connecting works best for them. One thing that I'd like to share with you all today is that no matter what tool we choose to use as a big driver of stewardship and a way to connect with our donors, I think we would do well to pay attention to 3 basic elements of meaningful conversation. If our tools change in the future with different phases of the pandemic, these 3 things, if we protect them, we will do our job well and be good stewards. The first is authenticity, which really involves setting the groundwork for honest relationships. The second is openness, where I really focus on the importance of creating space for true listening to happen. Again, looking at the tools we have a little differently. And finally, building shared trust through our day-to-day practice. So authenticity is an interesting one, right? When you look at the definition that Brown provides, she says, authenticity is a collection of choices that we have to make every day. It's about the choice to show up and to be real, the choice to be honest, the choice to let our true selves be seen. You can see within this definition glimmers of vulnerability and the importance of connection. Authenticity, however, isn't a new idea. It has its roots in humanistic psychology, going back to Abraham Maslow, and the philosophy of Socrates. And it really involves simple things that we do, but we may not realize. One is being authentic involves being passionate about what it is we believe in. It means that we're expressing our emotions, we're being thoughtful and reflective, and we're taking stock of what underlying motives or biases we may be bringing to a conversation. We also need to become really skilled in asking questions to gain perspective. And what it really involves at the heart is developing a true interest in other people, finding ways to connect in meaningful ways. And this is going to take time. It can't be rushed, and it's going to look different for every relationship. The second element of meaningful conversation is really all about creating space. Now, typically I would focus on creating 2 types of space. One is the physical space with a meeting, and the second would be interpersonal. However, given the circumstances, I'm really going to focus just on that interpersonal space. And for me, interpersonal space really involves a couple things, a couple preliminaries. One is establishing the time frame and being forthcoming about why you want to meet with the donor. Those are easy, right? Best practices. But what's a little tougher is that creating interpersonal space involves giving permission to your donors to talk about difficult things. Now, for me, in my line of work, this is usually permission to talk about dying and death. 1, because I work for a hospice, but 2, because my conversations typically involve plan giving and legacy. And a big piece, which we'll come back to in more detail, is practicing empathy. I'm reminded with this idea of creating space of Jerry Panis's work and his famous quote on listening. I also like this one by Stephen Covey that says, listen with the intent to understand, not the intent to reply. Now, I'm the type of person where naturally, if there's an awkward silence, I tend to want to fill that silence with chatter. I have to work really hard to pull back and allow the silence to be. I also, early in my career, was so ready and so willing to get everything right. I needed to work really hard to think what I was going to say next in the conversation. So much so that my sole focus was completely wrong. I wasn't listening to what I was hearing. I was asking a question to buy time to think what I was going to say next. So if we focus on truly creating space, we really have to hone the skills of becoming good listeners. The final element of meaningful conversation is really about building shared trust. And this is something that's done through our daily practice. This can be simply adding human elements to really technical communication about gift vehicles if you're having a planned giving discussion. It can be adding a personalized thank you note on a computer-generated letter. It involves remembering important dates. You know, are you remembering your donors' birthdays or anniversaries or dates of death that are meaningful to them? And basically, it involves following through with our actions and being accessible. If a donor calls you and you say, oh, I'll take care of that and I'll give you a call back at this time, are you following through as you've promised? Are you providing your phone number or your email or other contact information so that your donors know how to get in touch with you if they need it? At its heart and soul, trust is really built in very small moments. I had a conversation that reminded me of this last week with a donor. He had called to let us know that his aunt had left us in her estate plans, and he just wanted to know where to send a check. As I connected with him on the phone, I learned that he lives very close to my alma mater, close to Green Bay, and so we connected about the school there and the work. We had a nice chat. At the conclusion, I let him know that I'd give him a call as soon as we received the check he was sending so he could be sure that it arrived safely. A week later, I picked up the phone and I gave him a call to let him know the check had arrived safely. He was surprised to hear from me. And he said, you know, every person that I talked to from different organizations told me they'd give me a call. You're the only one that did. That makes a difference. Use those small opportunities to further your relationships. Build trust along the way. Very important. Now, I wanted to return for a second to the importance of empathy. I mentioned empathy as key for creating open space. And I want to share with you this quote. Empathy has no script. There's no right way or wrong way to do it. It's simply listening, holding space, withholding judgment, emotionally connecting, and communicating that incredible healing message of you're not alone. In development, we have the ability to do this. We can be empathetic. We can relay that message. But I would challenge you to think, can we do more than that? The power of our field and the power of our roles as fundraisers, no matter what your focus is, what your mission is we can do more than that. We can do what Martha Shoemaker calls being a community builder. I came across this in an issue of AFP's magazine last year, and it still holds true. It still resonates with me. She says, bringing people together, being part of something bigger than ourselves, building community. It is you, the fundraiser, who designs, implements, and fosters these communities. It is your work that enables philanthropic partners to become part of something special. As you educate and connect these partners with mission recipients and other stakeholders, they experience the joy of investing in the common collective good. You, the fundraiser, are the seminal social impact agent who makes it all happen. Our role as fundraisers are powerful. They're important. We are those social impact agents. We are those community builders, and we're in a position to invite others to join us. We can empathize. We can experience shared vulnerability and the power of connection. But what brings it all together in our craft is that we get to do that and then say, join us to do something about it. So I challenge you, as you're trying to raise dollars and meet your metrics during these trying times, don't lose sight of the very power that's just inherent in your role and the tools that you can adapt for the same results to become a social impact agent and help build our community. Thank you.